Hello everyone, my name is Esko Evtyukov, I'm a game developer, I make games. Today I'll be talking about a recent project I've worked on, Patch. Okay, so what is Patch? Patch is basically a project that we developed with my friend during about 4 months. It was quite a casual project. We released a demo of it. It's interesting, let's just say that. It's definitely not something polished. It's definitely not reinventing the wheel, but it was an interesting project to work on, and I'll be covering the development process and doing a bit of self-reflection and recording things for posterity. Now, so this video is going to have heavy spoilers for like Patch and its mechanics, so if you want to play it, there's an itch.io page that we've set up. You can download the demo from there. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to play it through. Consider giving us some feedback. There's a whole feedback form. So yeah, so we'll get right into the video then. So first I'm going to cover how did Patch start? Well, originally I wasn't even a part of the project. The Patch has a very strange past. My friend Ilmari, who I worked on it with, developed this project from a few weird side projects, and basically the first iteration of Patch was this very simple prototype that Ilmar made. So the basic premise of the game is basically, okay, that this is a first-person puzzle game, kind of like Portal. You have these patch boards and there are sockets, and you connect wires or patches, kind of like in a one of those audio systems, synth things. I don't know what they're called, but I think they have like patch cables. So like Ilmari named the game after those. So basically, it's pretty simple room. We have a cube. How do we get there? Well, we can't get to it, but there's a patch board here, so we can right-click this, disconnect it, and bounce pad is obviously was connected to bouncy, but then we take cube, we connect cube to bouncy, and okay, it starts suddenly bouncing around, as expected. We disconnect that, cube stops bouncing, we connect bounce pad to bouncy. The bounce pad is now bouncy, but the door is locked, so we take the cube, we put it here, door opens, and voila. We've beat the level. If I can actually get up here. The character controller has some issues, but this is a prototype. Yeah, let's see if I can actually manage this. There we go. So, yeah, you go to this corridor, there's no end, and that's basically the game. That was the prototype, and I don't remember exactly when this thing was developed. I think it was like 2020 or 2019, but basically my friend showed me the prototype. I really liked it. I thought, okay, cool, like I don't have time to develop games right now or the will, so basically I left him to his devices. He didn't develop it, but okay, fast forward to like 2021. I'm in the mood to develop some games. My friend is thinking, okay, we could like pick up the project again. And then I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I could help with you on working on Patch. And so basically we restarted the project and we started working on it again. And of course, here's the result that we came to. It's developed a bit, but we would like to think that the core at least like remained in it. I'm gonna like play through the demo and walk you through it all, and I'll give some commentary, and then I'll kind of like provide additional insight. So basically, very similar thing, improvements from the prototype. Well, we still have the same Pro Builder development textures, but the level geometry is much more advanced. The mechanics are much more advanced. Previously, we would have had a glass pane here stopping the player from touching these patches, but basically now they're here, and we have this elaborate system of different like sockets. We have like freeze, door, button, we have like cube, and of course we have these like fancy animated cables that show what direction the connection is in. And of course, because we can't have things be totally cryptic, then we have this obviously very fancy board explaining all of the things. Definitely the shape of this board is definitely in no way inspired by Portal. No, not at all. But yeah, allusions aside to other games, we go to the first chamber. This is simple. You look at the cube, you pick it up, everything's physics-based, you put it on the button. The button is physics-based too. I'm not sure if it can be seen so well if I drop it from a height. yeah, it's kind of springy. It has like spring physics on it. Then we have this door, it opens, we go to the next chamber, and then we see, okay, we have a bunch of more patches. We see, okay, like gravity is in cube, and we have freeze, the button is frozen, the door is frozen, all of that. And then we have another chamber, but now there's something different. We can't pick up the cube, so then the point is that we teach the player, okay, like that you can disconnect this patch, and then you can go and connect it to the here, and now you can suddenly pick up the cube. And then it's the same idea. And basically the game design principle we're using here is basically we're like taking baby steps and like teaching the player the basic mechanics of the game. Then we go to the next chamber. Then we have something very different, something reminiscent of previous things though. We have a cube over here at the top. We have a bouncy socket, we have a pad, we have a cube. This is kind of similar to the first prototype. And then we see, okay, we don't have any patches. So then we teach the player that, okay, they can backtrack, they can go back, and then they realize, okay, like we can go take a previous patch, and now we can leave it like this because it doesn't matter if the cube is still pickupable or not. So basically it kind of teaches us about the permanence of objects and patches and all of that. But yeah, basically we teach the player some stuff, we connect bouncy to cube, the cube starts bouncing around, very cool. We don't have any fancy sound effects this time around though. We pick it up, because this one is interactable by default, and then we put the bouncy to the pad. We jump on here, and then we get to the goal, and that's the first level. Yeah, so like also in this version of the game we have like clear progression, things like progress, and we have these like socket guides everywhere because we want to kind of like use simple language to try and teach the player what they can do, and kind of like the point is that we have like certain kind of sockets that do certain kind of things, and then the idea is that like players can figure out what they do and what they don't do. But yeah, basically then we have another cube, we put it here, and then we have this elaborate mess of things here that is kind of hard to decipher. So basically you look at here, oh, scary spikes, let's try and jump on them, whoopsie daisy, they kill us, so we end up back at the start. So then question is, how do we get past these spikes? Well, we look at this, we see, okay, we have a cube, we have a button, so then we have a bunch of different things. So for example, we have lethal, we have like lethal is connected to the spikes, and for example what we can do is, if I remember the solution to this puzzle correctly, we could, oh well, I disconnected gravity, so I'm going to connect gravity back to the cube. The button is off. Let's see, I think like we connect heavy to the cube. Okay, the button is on now. Oh yeah, and what happens in this puzzle is basically, okay, yeah, what happens in this puzzle basically is that we have the button, it's connected to mortal, we connect gravity to the cube, we connect heavy to the cube, and now the button is pressed down by the cube. I think this was like a heavy button that needed more force for it to be pressed down. And then the idea is that we teach the player that, okay, like you can use buttons to invert effects. For example, like this was mortal, the player was mortal, but now the player is immortal. So now if I jump on the spikes, nothing happens, we're fine. So that's kind of teaching another mechanic. And then we had this third puzzle. We were kind of worried when we were making this puzzle with my friend. We were kind of worried that it would be just too hard. But as it turns out, it was surprisingly well received with playtesters. Nobody said it was too hard or too difficult, but this puzzle is kind of hacky. So you have a bunch of things, you connect them, and basically we have like gravity connected to the cube. Is this cube interactable? No, it isn't. Let's see, do we have, yeah, pickupable, here we go. So we like connect that to the cube, we can pick it up, and then we can put it here. So then the idea is we have like a bunch of things, like these red connections are locked, so we can't edit them. I'm trying to click on this, it's just not working. So then the cube is immortal, so if we drop the cube, it dies, and then we can't solve the puzzle, so we need to restart the level. If we go into the spikes ourselves, we'll also die. And we can't affect these sockets in any way, so it's guaranteed that spikes are going to be lethal, we're going to be mortal, the cube's going to be mortal, the player's going to move. So those are the things that we cannot affect. But then we have stuff here. So the idea of this puzzle is basically that we have the cube, we put the Oh yeah, that's a little bug. Let's just pretend we didn't see that. Yeah, this prototype has some issues. That's a bug. Or an alternative solution. You can also think of it like that. But basically, we put this cube on here. Hopefully it won't slide away this time. And then we say, okay, like, we connect the button to gravity. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect heavy to the cube. So now the cube is also affected by gravity, so it goes up and down on the spring, and it oscillates in gravity. So the point then is that with this newfound low gravity, we're able to jump over the pit. So, oh, yeah, and we made it. And then, of course, we go to the final stage, and yep, and then we go to the final screen, and then we're able to give some feedback if we want to press this, and then we can also quit. So that's basically the demo. The last puzzle, we thought with my development partner, we thought it would be too difficult for players, but apparently it was just fine. So that's nice to hear. And of course, a big thing that went into developing and designing the levels for the demo was basically that we were trying to do this kind of reverse engineering design, where basically we would have a level at the end, and then we thought, okay, what are the mechanics we need to teach the player so that the player can do this level and they can succeed at like getting through it. So for example, with the final level, the point is that you're able to invert effects, you're able to like apply them to objects, and the point is that you're able to make this little clock system. And basically we taught about inverting objects and inverting effects in the previous levels, and basically then like the concepts presented later build up on concepts taught earlier. But that's basically the gist of it. So basically, this project took kind of a long time. It took about 4 months, way more than I'd like to admit. This project was very demanding from a technical perspective. This has been probably one of the, I'm like opening the Unity file. This project was most likely one of the most technically demanding projects I've ever done. On a mechanical level, this project has had some intricacies and interesting problems, but the biggest problem with this game was basically designing the back end and designing the game systems. And what do I mean by that? Okay, well, in the previous demo was very simple. It had a couple of sockets, it had a couple of mechanics, and it was simple. But if you go under the hood and like check out the first demo, a big problem it had was that the code was unscalable. The code was not very clean. It wasn't suitable for long-term development. So then when I joined this project and basically we started like working on a patch and we started making a new version pretty much from scratch, a big point that we made was to basically develop a system from scratch that was sustainable and basically scalable. In other words, we need to make a system that would be easy to modify, easy to develop, easy to extend, all of that stuff. So how did we do that? Well, we found solutions to that. We use like polymorphism in C# and all of that to be able to program different kinds of sockets. But that was the first problem. Okay, so we have like different types of sockets that do different things. Right, but then the big problem is, okay, how do we apply patches in the Unity editor? We can give the player the ability to put these patches into the game, but how do we do that in the Unity editor? How do we create tools that are easy to use and intuitive and that can give us the results we want? Well, that was a very interesting question. There were different options. At one point I thought, okay, maybe I'll just make like a weird like hacky button system that were like you'll press buttons to connect patches, but that wasn't really such a good idea. So what I went to do with basically the technical backend was basically I developed my own tool for connecting patches. Here, if we go to the left hand side, upper corner, there's this like little patch tool that I've developed, and basically it lets us drag patches naturally, change their state from like normal to locked, and this is like a really nice quick way to develop and like change the game, and basically like it runs on basically the same logic as the regular patch logic that the player uses. A big problem though with this system was that it was quite hellish to develop. Unity's technical documentation can be quite shoddy at times, especially when you approach more esoteric technical topics like this. And basically, I cannot understate how many goddamn bugs I had to fix to make this system work. At one point, for example, we had a very bizarre bug with basically prefabs in Unity, and basically we were trying to make modifications to sockets, so these things here, that the player connects to each other, and basically we would make modifications, but then they wouldn't save. And what it turns out was the issue was that for some reason, when we were modifying prefabs, basically these sockets were like based on prefabs. We have like a bunch of like prefab sockets. I think, where do we have them? Here. Yeah, we had like a bunch of prefab sockets, and basically when we were modifying them, they would change, they would revert to their default prefab state, and basically it had something to do with Unity's way of storing memory, of serializing data. I have no idea how it worked. So basically a weird workaround that we had to find, because we weren't able to figure anything else out, was basically we would take a prefab, and then when we would make modifications to it, we would unpack the prefab, which basically means we unlink it from its parent prefab instance. So basically it becomes a separate object that has no connection to the like default prefabs that you use to like quickly insert new things. Of course, yeah, but basically this developing patch and this version or iteration of patch required developing a lot of tools and developing a lot of things that would help us develop other things later down the line, if that makes sense. It was basically my role in developing patch was basically centered around trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to develop for us to be able to develop more effectively. For example, at one point early in development, we had to make these labels manually, which was obviously a big pain. So what we did was basically create this tool for us to be able to automatically generate patch labels. So for example, and automatically position them. For example, if I position this over here, and then I whoopsie daisy, let's just try and, yeah, here we go. If I position it over here, which is clearly not in the right place, I can just press force update and it brings it back. And then if I would change the sockets, so make this, for example, a freeze socket or a gravity socket or whatever else, and then I would like press force update or reinitialize, I don't remember which one it was. Basically it would automatically create and edit the text and position the text, which was really nice. And at the end of the day, it was a really nice quality of life feature. So basically we developed a lot of small things to help with the development. There was a lot of technical stuff that went into developing it. But okay, here's the issue, here's the kicker. After developing all of these features, there came a point where basically the game was in a state where we had developed mechanics. Meanwhile, I was working on the back end of working on some of the more technical aspects of the game. My friend Ilmari was working on various miscellaneous things. He was working on the character controller. He was working on implementing different patch sockets, testing them, finding bugs in the systems I made, and also he made some art, and he was pretty much like responsible for designing like all of the levels. Like he like used Pro Builder to like scale out these like corridors, these rooms, all of that stuff. Basically, yeah, so he did all of that, and at a certain point we developed patch enough and we realized, okay, this is like nearing a point where we can actually make a playable demo or prototype or whatever. And so the big thing about that was basically that making levels and making an actual game is very different from making tools for making a game, if that makes sense. In other words, we had become so caught up, or I had become so caught up with making tools, that we lost a bit of sight in actually making a game and in the development process. And then we had all these elaborate ideas, and when we were able to finally put them together, it turns out the demo, well, it turns out it had some issues, and of course we got some useful feedback on that. Big issues with like patch, the current demo that we have right now here, is for example that the game mechanics are very convoluted, they're very complex. We have like 3 different types of sockets, and they have like all these like connection rules, and we need this like big board to explain them. And we have like pretty much of design philosophy we wanted to, like, in the beginning of the game take, was basically that we're like everything's modular, everything's can be disconnected, connected, and all of that, that even like the player could even like soft lock themselves if they like wanted to. They could like disconnect movement from themselves and get trapped. But then we realized that, okay, like in retrospect, that it wasn't particularly fun, it wasn't particularly clear for like a puzzle game, and it wasn't particularly efficient to develop. For example, in every level we need to have this like boilerplate patch board where we have like different effects like gravity, movement, pick upable, like, and the different elements, like for example freezing the button and like key and connecting the button to the door and all of that. But that's not fun now, is it? It's not interesting for the player. If all of the sockets are locked, then the player can't do anything with them anyway, so they just see, okay, this is the state of the level, this is how things are, but it's not adding much to the game. So we tried to basically kind of parrot and copy Baba Is You in this aspect, because Baba Is You, it was a big inspiration for this game, and Baba Is You is extremely modular and extremely, how would I say, like open-ended in how it connects its stuff. And basically in Baba Is You, the levels can vary very widely, and they can have different like initial states. But even in Baba Is You, there are like some few very basic assumptions that you have about the level, that for example like the player can move around with like their character, and they can like affect and push things and whatever else. So basically there are 2 options from a game design perspective. Either A, we have a consistent set of behaviors that the player has in every level, so that there's some kind of baseline of behavior that the player can expect. Or B, we don't have that consistent baseline, but then that can create new design problems and it can make it even frustrating if the rules of the game change all of the time. Of course, that can also be a positive thing, but it's a slippery slope of design that wasn't particularly good for the game. But basically, yeah, we had these big cable messes, basically. If we go to another level, let's see, we have like the main levels, we go to level 1. I think here, for example, this. Okay, the sole purpose of this level was to simply teach the player that they can use the button to invert the immortal state. But frankly, this is very ugly to look at. This is not elegant. This does not look like an extremely fun or interesting puzzle game. This looks like this looks like an unfortunate piece of modern art. Basically, so, and the big question is, like, do we really need certain, like, sockets and certain effects? Like, for example, do we really need this gravity effect if there's really no point in even, like, taking it off? So basically, the design has some bloat in it. The design has some problems, and basically it has some issues. That's the best way to put it. And if we go to let's see, this is not the right one. This is the last level, yeah. Let's see, here it is. So even if we go here too, like, this is quite ugly, and this is not extremely interesting from a design perspective. It's visually cluttered. It bogs down the game. Like, these things could also be expressed as assumptions. For example, another way we could have improved the game design now in retrospect is, for example, just like say, okay, all objects are mortal, the player can always move, and then we wouldn't have to have this separate board. We could just say that, okay, like, some objects can kill things or whatever else. So basically, yeah, there there are some idiosyncrasies in the design of patch in the game. So, and of course, we were working on this game for like maybe 4 months. So we had all these ideas of how the game would work, but in practice we didn't actually know what would work and what wouldn't work until we actually would play test the game. And now that we've made an actual demo and we have a like feedback form, we've like gave it to a few people, we got some feedback, and we also like reflected on the like play test ourselves and like on what we made. Now it seems very obvious. So in retrospect, we were able to gain feedback, and we were able to fail, and we were able to gain that that valuable insight. And that takes me to one of the biggest cruxes of patches developments, and that's that we were unable to fail fast enough. Okay, so in game design, there's a very prominent mantra, saying, and principle of iteration, and then like it can be basically condensed into the simple phrase, fail faster. Any game, any idea, you can build a prototype of any game and any idea, and you have to test it as fast as possible so that you can gain the maximum amount of feedback as efficiently and fast as possible. And what does this actually mean? It basically means, the point of this is basically that you want to, when making games, you want to make a prototype as fast as you can, and you want to get feedback for it so that you don't end up making something or committing to an idea that just doesn't work, an idea that's inherently flawed. A big problem that with our development process for patch was basically that our game is extremely convoluted. It had like complex logic, it had like many mechanics, and just like being able to like develop even simple levels for the game required me to learn new skills and like develop like all these like custom tools so that we could even make levels. But then in the end, we weren't able to playtest the game early enough and get that critical feedback. And only now, after like 4 months of like work, we were able to get the first version out and be able to play test. And of course that's a bit of a problem. So we weren't able to play test fast enough, and that was like the first and biggest issue with the game. Yeah, so what else? What went well with the game? Well, aside from my and our failures in this project, we also had many successes. We finished a demo, which is quite a big feat. It has concrete mechanics, and we also got valuable feedback from players, and also just like from being able to make this thing an actual reality. And of course, although this project was very demanding from a technical perspective, I was able to learn many new things while developing it. For example, these fancy visuals on the cables, those were developed by me. I learned the basics of shaders, and basically I was able to implement a very simple scrolling shader for the game. Let's see, I have a folder. Yeah, let me see. I'm gonna bring this up. I had a very concrete vision of what the game would look like very early on in development, from like a visual perspective. So I'm gonna go and see what do I have? Yeah, we have it in here. Yeah, so I had a very concrete idea of how the game would look like early on in development, and this picture here is a picture like that was drawn like literally maybe the first time we started like pre-production for this this newest iteration of patch. So if we go here, we like change this to like a normal cable. The similarities are striking, to say the least. Very similar, and of course we tried to use the visuals of patch to try and like give the player information. For example, a big problem or challenge in patch was, for example, some sockets could have two-way connections, and of course in general all these connections between sockets are always one way. it's always one thing affecting the other. For example, the mortal modifier is making the cube mortal. The lethal modifier is making the spikes lethal. If we go here, then we have, for example, the button. For example, the button modifier, or not modifier, but the logic component of the button is affecting the pickupable component. Or for example, it could be connected to gravity, and then it would be affecting the gravity component. But on the other hand, if we would drag the connection another way here, then it would be gravity affecting the button component. Or not the button component, but the object component of the button, if that makes sense. Well, as I said, the mechanics were a bit convoluted. As you can see in the patch socket type connection guide thing here, there were multiple different ways to connect things. And basically, what we stressed was that connections were one way. So then, in one part of the development, the connections were black, but that wasn't very good visually. So then I made this shader to first liven up the game, make it feel a bit more dynamic, a bit more interesting visually, and also the scrolling animation gives the player clear indication of where the connection is going, what the causal relationship is. So basically, I learned shaders for that. This is quite a simple shader, but I learned the basics of shaders, which is great. Also, the interesting thing about these cable components, you might think they're line renderers, but they're not. They're actually physical meshes. If we go to gizmos, maybe we can get a selection out wire. Maybe we can get a wireframe thing here going. I don't know. Selection wire. No wireframes. Oh well. Well, anyway, this is like a quad. It's not like a pre-spawned quad that has been scaled or anything. It's basically a mesh that's generated on the fly for the cable component, and then we have like it has some interesting things. For example, there's like some data that the shader takes in about the length of the wire that it then uses to like scale the wire texture properly, and there's like some technical stuff with that. But basically, while making the wires for patch and making the shader and all of that, I also learned a bit about mesh generation and how that works. So then that was also very insightful from a technical perspective. What else is there to talk about? Well, what's next for the project? Honestly, we don't know. Working on patch was fun. It was insightful. It was quite interesting. But a big problem with the project is that we've taken a few missteps. On one hand, we have all these tools, we have all this infrastructure, and when I say infrastructure, I say like it's very extensive. Like if we go into scripts, we have the scripts here. Don't we have scriptable objects? No, socket logic. In socket logic, we have like a bunch of like socket scripts, and we have like master classes, and like we have stuff with like inheritance and all of that, and it just works. I think it's designed fairly well. It's very expandable. It's very flexible. So if we would want to start to modify this project and start and like take it in a new direction, we have like a bunch of ideas what we could do to try and solve the problems with the like cluttered mechanics and a bunch of other stuff. That would be very much possible. But the big problem with this project is that its scope may be a bit too big. And that's the thing we had to like understand during development, or that we had to like figure out during development. In the beginning, we had this ideas that, okay, this is going to be like this grand game where we're gonna have like a story, we're gonna have like a narrator, we're gonna have like be a like portal, like mixed with Babe's U. We're gonna have all these elaborate puzzles, and we had these like ideas for like socket modifiers and logic and like puzzles and all of that. But then actually implementing all of this stuff was extremely hard. And this is just the technical implementation. Then like beyond this, we have to also still like design better game mechanics. We need to design levels. We need to get some kind of art that's better than these development textures from like Pro Builder. And basically we need to like actually develop the project, and there are like many different aspects. Of course, like some solution to this could be, for example, trying to cut down on the mechanics, try and like perhaps make the game shorter, perhaps make the art simpler, perhaps also like just first off just cut out the story, maybe also like cut back on other features that we had planned. But then even with that, this is a very large project, and this is a complicated project because, for example, puzzle games are not easy to develop. Puzzle games aren't just like develop some interesting character controller and some interesting mechanics, throw in a few levels and like game feel and you're done. Puzzle mechanics, you need to like design interesting mechanics, puzzles, and so many other things. So basically, this is a large project. And on one hand, it's tempting to say that, okay, like we've already sunk so much time into it, we should keep on going with it and develop it further, but that's the sunk cost fallacy, and that's not very healthy either. So although finishing projects is fun, that's not very healthy either, trying to like justify keep developing one project just because you've invested a lot of time into it. Of course, we have no idea. Maybe we may continue the project, but that's still up for debate. Currently, with my friend Ilmari, we have an idea for another game that we're going to be developing. It's like in early pre-production right now, so there might be some content related to that on this channel later. We'll have to see where it goes. But if anything, unfortunately, in the beginning, I had this vision that Patch could be this grand, megalomaniacal, great like first-person puzzle game that could be like a great portfolio work. It would like look so cool and all of that. But in the end, we managed to at least pump out this demo. We're not sure if it's going to become anything more, but at least it's been a very insightful project, and I've been able to just brush off some old rust, like really get back into like the game development process, like get back into like producing games, like programming and all that, and also just like developing my skills. This has definitely been a project that has taught me a lot. So basically, yeah, I think that's all. Basically, yeah. If you like this type of content and are interested in following my game development in the future, I suggest liking this video and maybe subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.